was that. Please welcome Christmas.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey. So my presentation today is about music. And it's important to think about how you have purchased music in the past. This project began as part of the class, The Art of Protest, that I took last semester. And the requirement for the class was actually to produce a collection or body of work of some sort that would be available for public consumption. That is a blog post or something of that nature. I'll get to what I ended up doing in a bit. My largest goal for this project, the title of which was Songs of Protest and Representation, 1965 to 1970, was just to pick 10 songs. And I'll go through my process as to how I chose those songs and why I chose the songs that I did. Beyond the scope of those 5 years and the 10 songs I'm talking about, I want to talk a little bit about the history of music as a commodity, as a corporate culture entity. It's very important. We're not talking about the small subsets of music and our favorite musicians, but pop. The largest sense of the word, what is pop music, and how have we purchased that in the past. And I thought this was a pretty good picture to start with, right? I don't know if you have a record collection or how proud you are of it. Nope. Sorry. A couple slides ahead. So why 1965 to 1970? The image here is of the best-selling hit single in 1965. There's quite a lot of social representation going on in this cover. I don't think Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs really picked that image. I think they were handed some costumes, right? That may or may not be a safe assumption. But it's important to think about these musicians trying to make it and how the major label chose to sell them, right? Remember, records in 1965 were a 2-song purchase, right? This was the best-selling one of those at 45 RPM. 3 different ways to think about the years 1965 to 1970. We could go on about that all day, right? But it might as well say there was social unrest in the United States of a variety of flavors. There were evolutions going on in recording media. How do we make the music that we will sell? Well, it suddenly became way cheaper, right? Way cheaper. The first record Elvis ever made, he walked into Sun Studios and wanted to make a recording for his mother. It cost him like $2. And he walked out with a vinyl 45 RPM record. By 1965, more than 15, almost 15 years after that technology took place, it was becoming popular to get a long-playing record. A whole bunch of songs on 2 sides. Well, that's a different kind of commodity than what we were used to. There was already production and distribution systems in place. There was already lots of record stores and lots of ways to get these things to the people that wanted to buy them. Finally, it's important to think about home listening as an art form. I mean, recording and sound recording that we would purchase for our own enjoyment is still very, very new. It was even newer back then. But it was a new idea that instead of going to the opera, you could buy a copy of a recording of an opera, right? People were getting into it. Hi-fi stereo systems were all around. And to what extent were people seeking inside of the music they bought? To what extent were they seeking a reflection of the society that they lived in? That's a key point, right? To what extent do you, the music you listen to, look for that music to be a representation of the place you live and the world you see? Or do you look to music for escapism? All of that happened between 1965 and 1970. Much of it hadn't happened before those years. So in 1966, the Beatles, their 9th record for Capitol Records, well, they had done this photo shoot for a very avant-garde photographer in Britain, And when Capitol said, what would you like the cover of your next album to be? It had songs like Yesterday and I Feel Fine. Well, John Lennon convinced the others that this would be the greatest image, as a reflection of the society they were living in. Anybody know the story of what happened with this? If you have one of these in your stack of vinyl, it's worth a great deal of money. There were 750,000 of them made, but Capitol Records had to pull them off the shelves within a week. They took them all and stamped on top of that another image. It's a very, very esteemed collectible to find one that has both layers of cover on it, right? Because, look at this, is that a reflection of the society that we live in? Is that a 2013 image? Okay, so a guy in 1975, David Berger, did a study of cycles of symbolic production inside of pop music. Every few years we're going to see the same rounds of love songs and protest songs and this and that, but not even that much. He didn't cast much hope upon the realm of popular music as being a place people could seek a reflection of the society that they live in. Social turmoil is not inevitably mirrored in popular music.
During that time or now?
He was speaking about 1965 to 1970.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great question for today.
Okay.
So why did I pick the songs that I did? I picked 10. I could have picked 100, right? There's lots of songs from that time. Amazingly, many of them were written in 1965. It was a very, very big year for songwriting. So my criteria was simply this. I wanted to come up with a project that could be consumed by the internet people for the rest of time, and I didn't want to do 100 songs. I figured 10 was doable. They had to be released by a major record label between 65 and 70. They had to use the genre of popular music lyrically to identify and describe the nature of the individual in society. They had to achieve immense commercial success. Most of them still do. So I'll just give you a quick rundown. I'm not running you through all 10 songs. Many of these are still FM airplay fodder, right? But some good images of these folks. Anybody call anybody out? You know who's who? We got Bob Dylan, right? Bob Dylan. And the song that I chose was Mr. Tambourine Man. Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me, right? For the project, I did a written contextualization of these lyrics and posted them to my blog, and then I did something on YouTube that I'll get to in a little bit. So we got Bob Dylan for Mr. Tambourine Man. He wrote it in 1964 after coming back from a trip from New Orleans, or so he says. Who else do we know up here? Otis Redding. Otis Redding wrote the song Respect. He wrote it. He wrote it as a man speaking to a woman. He gave the song to Aretha Franklin shortly thereafter. It was she that made a major hit out of it. I consider him a pretty important songwriter. Who else? Joni Mitchell. She wrote a song called Both Sides Now in 1966. I took that to be a representation of the individual. You forgive my paper shuffling, I'll read you some lyrics. I've looked at love from both sides now, from give and take, and still somehow it's love's illusions I recall. I really don't know love at all. This was not what people turned to pop music for. Statements of individualism and self-expression is not woolly bully. Right? It's not. When the corporate culture, and this is a larger study that has not taken place in my world, but what did the corporate culture, the record labels in 1965 want? Well, there was a dichotomy between the safe, perhaps square records and popular music that people were listening to, regardless of what they were being handed. Mitch Miller Sing Along with Mitch, is a good example of what the record companies knew was a safe bet. And the last fellow, John Lennon. Across the whole Beatles catalog, I believe that we've been done a disservice in the legal apparatus that makes every song they ever wrote being a song they wrote, Lennon and McCartney. I think it's important that we start pulling apart which Beatle actually wrote which song. John Lennon wrote the song Happiness is a Warm Gun after being handed a magazine article at Abbey Road. He thought it was one of the funniest things he'd ever read. So he did this song that was a pretty elaborate parody of such a thing. Happiness is a Warm Gun, Mama. Along with a lot of psychedelic lyrics, she's well acquainted with the touch of the velvet hand like a lizard on a window pane, the man in the crowd with the multicolored mirrors and his hobnail boots, lying with his eyes while his hands are busy working overtime. Whew, sounds like Jim Morrison. Right? That one you can find on the White Album. He recorded it in 1966 and it came out in 67. Some groups. Notice each one of those on the last slide, they were individual songwriters. It's important to know Otis Redding from the last slide and Joni Mitchell from the last slide. Both of them wrote a song and gave it to somebody else to sing. Joni Mitchell's Both Sides Now was recorded by Judy Collins in 1966. She did her own version in 69. Can we name any of these folks?
Aren't those the Stones?
These are the Rolling Stones. And Keith Richards said that in a dream, the riff for I Can't Get No Satisfaction came to him. I took that to be quite a song of individual expression and representation. Anybody else?
Neil Young. Here's Neil Young.
Okay, it's Neil Young right here. Who's this fella?
Sean Lennon.
Stephen Stills. They would leave the group Buffalo Springfield to go on to start Crosby, Stills, Nash. In 1966, the music clubs along a certain street in Los Angeles were becoming very, very popular. People were flocking to them and truly causing a disturbance in the street. The cops put in a curfew. You can't be seen on the street. Well, there was a major protest, right? Major protest. Everybody showed up and blocked the intersection, and the cops ended up changing their law about it. Stephen Stills wrote the song For What It's Worth about that experience. There's something happening here, what it is, right? So that's Buffalo Springfield. The last group, that's a tough one.
Stevie Winwood, I forget
That is
Steve.
Steve.
Steve Winwood's in there.
Creed? No. No, Creed. It's not
They only had one album. And it follows Cream, but it's before Traffic. And the album, the group and the album name is Blind Faith.
Right.
Steve Winwood wrote the song Can't Find My Way Home to be recorded by Blind Faith. Let me give you some lyrics from that one. Come down off your throne and leave your body alone. Somebody must change. You are the reason I've been waiting so long. Somebody holds the key. Well, I'm weary and I just ain't got the time, and I'm wasted and I can't find my way home. To what extent were people seeking a reflection of their lives inside of the pop music that came out of their radio? And to what extent do we do that today? A couple more. Sloop John B., I wanna go home, let me go home. That was a song from the Caribbean, and Brian Wilson hated it, hated it. The other members of the Beach Boys insisted that they record it. He claims that he came up with some vocal harmonies that he really enjoyed, and that's why they did it. There's conflicting stories all over the Beach Boys catalog. Elvis Presley is probably one of the best examples of the intersection between the record label and the artist. How many songs did Elvis write in his lifetime?
2.
0. 0. He never wrote one song. He never wrote one lyric. To what extent was he kind of a product of the fame that they wanted him to be? Well, that's a larger and more intricate study. But it's suffice to say, in 1969, this photo was taken while Woodstock was going on in August 1969. Elvis was playing a string of shows in Vegas, meeting Frank Sinatra Sammy Davis Jr. and the Rat Pack. But right before that run of shows, he was handed a song written for him by Jimmy Webb, In the Ghetto. I assume most folks know it. No? Shaking your head.
Sing it, they would
In
know.
the ghetto.
Hey, you've been working on
In
that.
the ghetto.
That's good. That's good. As the snow flies on a cold and gray Chicago morn, poor little baby child is born in the ghetto, and his mama cries, because if there's one thing that she don't need, it's another hungry mouth to feed in the ghetto. People don't understand the child needs a helping hand, or he'll grow to be an angry young man someday. Take a look at you and me. Are we too blind to see? Or do we simply turn our heads and look the other way? Elvis bought Graceland in 1955, and he pretty much didn't leave it since that point.
He didn't live in the ghetto.
And yeah, to what extent would you expect someone like Elvis Presley to know something about the ghetto to the point that he would sing a song about it? Or was it a business idea that he was handed this song? The social unrest taking place in the summer of 1969 is kind of unfathomable to some of us. It's important to keep that in mind. To what extent were people looking to their pop music for a reflection of the world they live in? Even somebody as alienated as Elvis Presley was told by his corporation to sing such a song. Finally, the last one, and here's hoping the video works. I asked a lot of people just firsthand, hey, what do you remember? What were the songs that were important to you during this time? So many people told me that everybody knew this song. It was written by a guy named Country Joe McDonald. His band was called Country Joe and the Fish. They played at Woodstock, and that was it. He was absolutely, after this performance, disowned by his label, disowned by just about everything. His records were being pressed. Today, they're still not. The film Woodstock came out the following year. I won't show you the whole clip of him singing this song, but know that in the second verse and second chorus, the lyrics come across the screen and there's a bouncing ball that you might want to sing along to. Can you imagine that happening in the movie theater in 1970?
Well, come on, all you big strong men, Uncle Sam, need your help again. Got yourself in a terrible jam, way down yonder in Vietnam. Put down your books and pick up a gun, we're gonna have a whole lot of fun. And it's 1, 2, 3, what are you fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7, broken out hurricanes. Well, there ain't no time to wonder why. We're all gonna die. Now come on, Wall Street, don't be slow. One man, this is war, go. There's plenty good money to be made. Supply the army with the tools to trade. Just don't be afraid to drop the bomb, beat it hard. And it's 1, 2, 3, what are you fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7, broken out hurricanes. But I ain't no time to wonder why. We all wanna die. Now
You imagine such a thing coming through your radio, unsolicited, as a reflection of the society in which you live. It may be hard for us to imagine pop music being used in such a way, right? The record industry had a problem on its hands. This is it worth their money to print such a record, right? They decided not to. However, the record industry shot itself in the foot the year after Woodstock. They absolutely shot themselves in the foot and started a problem for themselves that they are still recovering from today.
Right.
As soon as these came out, the content on our recorded media that we would go to the record store and buy, the content became less important than what we might do with it. The minute the record industry tried to sell a new form of physical media, well, you could buy the record and I could tape it, and I didn't have to pay and you did. This is what we're dealing with today, right? In a variety of forms. The record industry, after the release of the cassette, has not seen the economic success that it ever did in 65 to 70. And then, There could be a larger small chapter about the use of disco as a corporate venture to give people something to listen to that isn't going to tell you, whoopee, we're all going to die, right? But then MTV began helping us think about music in a new way, and I would direct you to, if I could direct you to one book, it would not be The Art of Protest, but Rocking Around the Clock, Music, Television, Postmodernism, and Consumer Culture. This came out in 1987. E. Ann Kaplan is incredibly skeptical about why does MTV exist? Why does MTV exist? To what extent can MTV be a reflection of the culture in which we live? Because I think we might all be able to remember a time where MTV was kind of at the reins of what pop music might be considered. A quote from her: "While the relations between MTV and the subjects it constructs do not involve the same kind of power as Foucault's mental, penal, and educational institutions, the station," she keeps calling it the station, "deliberately creates for its own profit subjects who would not otherwise exist." That's a new leap. None of the songs that I picked out from 1965 and 1970, we could say that these people didn't exist, right? From Otis Redding to Elvis Presley, they did exist.
Unless you confuse the Beach Boys as being really more something.
Unless you confuse the Beach Boys with what?
As being an amalgamation of something. You know, they've been accused of really just singing and covering. I mean, so if you cover other people's songs, then you have created a subject that really doesn't exist because the narrative of that song has been created to be something other than what it was really intended to be.
I give an artist credit if they take on somebody else's lyrical representation and make it their own. That's still their rhetorical choice. What was the rhetorical choice of the two fellows holding Grammys?
Not to speak.
Yeah, what's the story there? Let's make sure we all know what happened.
They didn't sing.
They lip sync.
They had ghost singers.
They had ghost singers. They went into the production studio and their tracks were erased or perhaps never recorded, and others were put in their place. What are they holding?
Yes.
What are those? Those are awards for the finest work of its kind in its area. Did Milli Vanilli make more money from MTV or from record sales? By this point, it was indistinguishable. It's kind of hard to tell. That's a really difficult question to answer. Shortly after that faux pas, who else did MTV invent from nothing? One of the first series that took the place of the videos. It became really useful and really lucrative to create subjects who would not otherwise exist. And yeah, it was a crude animated show, but suddenly this station was not focused on music. To this day, I see MTV as playing a large role in pop. MTV's greatest achievement has been to coax rock and roll into the video area where you can't distinguish between entertainment and the sales pitch. You can't tell when they're trying to sell you something or when they're just trying to entertain you. I can't say the same if I'd ever had the chance to see Elvis Presley or Otis Redding. I can't say that about them. So some conclusions. Musicians' ability to express political, social, cultural, and ethical opinions in the mainstream popular music has decreased since 1970. It's a bold statement. I could do a couple years more research to back that one up. But I will put it out there. Major record labels continue to be challenged by changes in recordable consumer media and the resulting musical piracy. Record companies are fighting that uphill battle. One tactic, instead of suing someone for going on to Napster and downloading an album for free, has been to pursue performance rights. I did a series of performances at a small coffee shop in my town. Some original work and some other people's work. You know, there was a guy from the record industry there who was threatening to bring a lawsuit against the coffee shop unless they paid $3,000 for performance rights throughout the year. And I said to the coffee shop, $3 grand's not bad. That's really not bad for the performance rights to any song ever. Coffee shop didn't go for it. They shut down the series. And MTV has played a major role in defining representation of individuals and groups in popular music. No question there. The question of its influence today might be a topic for another day. So what can you find on the internet? My lyrical analysis of each song and a contextualizing essay are posted on my blog. On a YouTube playlist, I have created new performances of all 10 songs that I chose. Some of them standing around my backyard, some of them in my studio, some of them in the basement, but a variety of performances. As a group, these are presented and now available to the world to see that there was a time where we could look to pop music for representation of the society in which we live. And a little work study. Thank you.
Thank you.